Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Middleboro. We're very happy that you came today to the first of our summer services, and we're willing to get up so early. I really appreciate it. John O'Donoghue, an Irish poet, has said, "At its heart, the journey of each life is a pilgrimage through unseen sacred places that enlarge and enrich the soul." For my daughter Nancy and me, hiking through the mountains of Spain on a pilgrimage to the Cathedral of St. James truly enlarged and enriched our souls. This is a This is a picture of the Cathedral of St. James, where we ended up. Each of us has a Camino, a road to life, to follow. On it, we access many people, places, and energy that has a profound impact on us. Today, I would like to share with you some of the truths I learned along the way. Truths that I need to keep learning over and over, deeper and deeper, day by day. I read over about a dozen books in preparation for the Camino. There was valuable information in each. Travel lightly, we were advised by all of them. I was aware that I lived in a world of consumerism, where more, not less, was essential. I read many lists of what was necessary to put into your backpack in order for you to have what you needed during all the days that you traveled. Most previous travelers suggested you carry no more than 15 or 16 pounds. This is quite a feat. When you have a little scale that you're trying to measure things by, you have no idea how much everything weighs. For example, I spent a long time getting just the right boots. And halfway through the journey, I changed to these, which were the sandals that you were supposed to wear at night. The boots were just way too heavy. And if you took them off and tried to put them on your backpack, it was way too heavy. They probably weighed 7 pounds, just the boots. Nan was much better at this than I was. One needed to leave room to put in a hunk of cheese, bread, and a piece of fruit, because often that might be all that you got to eat for the day. Water was essential, but a 2-liter bottle was heavy. Spain had an entirely different culture. The schedule was so different from what I had known for a lifetime. All stores were closed in the afternoon for a siesta, and dinner began at 9 o'clock at night. Many people were on their way getting up in the morning for the Camino, at 5:30. Neither Nancy nor I was willing to follow the shell signs which guided our way using a flashlight. We slept in a change of clothing overnight, so all you often needed to do was pack in the morning. We might travel several towns before one could get a cup of morning coffee. You were always served pastry with the coffee, but often that was all you could get. I mean, the thought of having eggs or something else, it just didn't happen in most places. There was a dish of eggs and potato that occasionally you could get, and I used to think, oh, this is like so good. Nancy loved picking berries along the path for nourishment. There were lots of blueberries and blackberries and strawberries. When I moved into our house in Lakeville, the Stevens gave me a sign which said, "Simplify it." I treasure it. Less is more. All along the way, we saw items that prior pilgrims left behind. We shared any item that another needed, like a safety pin or bandage. Generosity was abundant. For a few miles after I had taken a fall, Nan attached my backpack to the front of her and walked, carrying both packs. I found out when I came home that I had actually had a slit in my shin. There was much more than an exterior traveling lightly that happened for me. I had to divest myself of some inner things. A teacher who wanted to learn, a workshop leader, a retreatant. Here, I was like everyone else, a pilgrim. When meeting another, we might share our geography, but very little beyond that of yourself. We were all human beings open to what the Camino might reveal. Nonetheless, I have the less I need to take. Nonetheless, the less I have, the less I need to take care of. As I look around my home, I think of what could find a good home somewhere else. How many sets of sheets do I really need? Or sets of dishes? I probably had 12 sets of dishes. For every season, I had a set of dishes. And then when I came back from Florida, I had 2 sets of Christmas dishes, my dishes from there and my dishes from here. Remember the book suggesting we have 100 items in our wardrobe? I went through that many times and wondering what that would really be like. When Elizabeth Tarbox, a former minister of this church, went to the lake to simplify her life, she had 3 utensils and just a few dishes in her kitchen. She wanted to really live simply. I first learned about the Camino when David Kramer, my daughter Nancy, and I were doing a pilgrimage to Israel, Spain, and Portugal. While we traveled, we saw many people walking the Camino and were told by our guide some of its background. We actually attended a mass and had a picture taken with the people that were in our group on the steps in the front of the Cathedral of St. James, the culminating place of the Camino. But it wasn't until 2016 that I set off to actually walk the 100 kilometers required for attaining a certificate of completion. And this is what the certificate looked like. When I turned 60, I felt I had completed a third of my life and wanted to celebrate my birthday with 60 people. It ended up, I had 72 at the fireplace for a luncheon and festivities. Dear Eddie played the guitar and sang, and with Marty Hartford, and we just had a blast. So as I approached 75, I wanted to mark this birthday by walking the Camino. I wanted to be one with the millions of feet from many lands and culture who had followed that path and walked over those stones and fields, including popes and even Charlemagne. So that's how far back they started doing this. And good weather, as many as 1,000 people begin it every single day. It took us a couple of days of flying and a train ride before we arrived at Sarria. There were hundreds of pilgrims on the train with us. You could easily tell because they had backpacks. They all flocked to a standing bulletin board when we arrived. Nan and I decided to take a walk around and return to the board when it was less crowded. We found a lovely refugio, a refuge or shelter, that's what they were called along the way, to stay that first night. Unlike most nights, when you could have 40 or 60 people in the same room on bunk beds with you, we had a room to ourselves. We were happy to ignore the chatter, and we settled in and retired early. We learned the Bien Camino greeting immediately, and so all along the way, when we passed people, we wished them a good journey. We walked mostly together, letting other pilgrims be on their way. We both savored solitude. Nancy is a real introvert, and we're very mindful when we used words. We knew we wanted to walk about 10 to 12 miles a day if we were to complete our journey in the allotted time before our return plane ride. There was so much physical beauty to see. We would pause on the side of the road and sit a bit to take in something we were especially touched by. I now try to notice how beautiful a dandelion or any other wildflower could be, if only I have the presence to be aware. This morning, I picked these flowers right from our garden. They look so beautiful when they're all together. But before the Camino, I would so often just go on my way and not take the presence to notice. Sunflower oil was used in transportation throughout Spain, so there were acres of sunflowers when we passed. The friend that I had originally planned to go with found poppies everywhere when she traveled because it was a different season. It was not unusual to share the path with a herd of cattle or sheep. One had to be careful where one was walking after that. Sometimes there were gentle rolling hills, especially in Galicia. But other times there were deep ascents and descents. Sometimes you needed to squeeze between deep crevices where you just did not want to be claustrophobic. The heat was often in the high 90s or early hundreds. I often wore a long sleeve shirt over a short sleeved shirt in order not to get sunburned. I love when Nancy sang, "Music so feeds my soul." It was very tender to join her in some of the songs for peace. She used to sing, "Oh dear God, three things I pray," and it just was so lovely. There were times when the path required every bit of strength one could muster. We knew that we could not let difficulty deter us. We would take deep breaths, put one foot in front of the other, and just proceed. We sometimes wondered if we would make it to the top of a particular mountain. At one point, Nancy said, "I know now why we read The Little Engine That Could when I was a child." That knowledge somehow helps. Just a second. On my actual birthday, the refugio where we were staying served breakfast, which was unusual. Very few of them did. If you were bringing something, you might cook it there, but very few of them did a breakfast for you. But that morning, my egg had a little hat upon it as it sat, and there was fruit and muffins. The host had grown up in South Africa during apartheid. He had a life-threatening illness and was cured during a walk on the Camino. He made the decision after that to purchase a building and to make it into a refugio. His name was Gordon, the same as my dad, so I felt a special affinity for him. He gave us tips about where to stay for our next 2 days and called ahead to make reservations for us. This was one of the times that Nancy and I had a little bit of a to-do because I am so used to doing what I'm told. What he had said was we had to check in by 6 o'clock, which was fine on the first day. But the second day, we had to we kept going, and it got closer and closer to 6 o'clock, and I'm going, we have to call them and tell them we're going to be late. They won't save a... And Nancy's going, "It's okay. Relax. Enjoy what you're doing." And so we eventually got there. And of course, it wasn't any problem at all when we arrived. But I had put myself through all that kind of stuff because of who I am. Marina Wendeker wrote, "If I am slavishly attached to the previous moment, or if I'm already living tomorrow's moment, then I'm not free for the moment of the eternal now." We will miss that moment if we're always looking for other things. Living the now became more important as each day passed. There was so much not to be missed. Finding food and housing, traveling 12 miles a day required our total energy. Greater and greater awareness seemed to come with each moment. Our entire body, with its many aches and stresses, strengthened and stretched our being. Eckhart Tolle in The Power of Now tells us the more we live in the now, the more we are able to discover what stirs within us. Joyce Rump wrote in a relaxed way. Walking in a relaxed way was the best. Like I said, I read dozens of books, but this was the most meaningful one that I found. The steady rhythm of walking, the focus on the body's condition, the need to be alert to where one walks, the long hours of reflection, all allow for living in the now. We were always looking out for the yellow arrow in scallop shells that constantly pointed to the Camino's route, past every type of terrain and structure. Attention is vital, or one could easily add necessary mileage to the day's journey. There was a time when we missed a sign and we walked and walked and walked. Now we carried these little maps that told us where to go. There was a little book when we started off, but we tore it down to just what we were using. And, when you're trying to do 12 miles, to put on 4 extra miles is a little bit of a stretch. We had a guidebook which told us about the path and the places, but the yellow shell was much more specific. But you could miss it if you weren't really looking, because it was on a building or it was on the road or it could be anywhere. In our lives, it is just as important to be present to our lives as they are unfolding. What I find that when I experience the divine, my spirit of life and love, uniting with me in all that is. Delight and peace are readily present. We stayed at one inn on the Camino. We had walked long and hard. We were exhausted when we came upon it. We knew that there was no way we could walk the distance to the next Camino, which was probably another 3 or 4 miles. So we went in to register. I leaped into the tub and soaked in as if it was the greatest pleasure I had had in my lifetime. Instead of washing our clothes in the shower like we often did, we usually put them in a washer and dryer, and felt exhilarated to be able to pack our bags the night before. What you would do is, when you got to a place, you would right away go into the shower. And very often, you would just as you were taking your clothes off, you would just wash them right in the shower. And once in a while, you would take them to a washer and do them. And they would be these clotheslines that you would hang them up and hope that they would be dry the next day. It did not bother Nancy at all if she had to put on something wet the next day, or if something didn't dry, she would just hang it on the outside of her backpack and let it go along the way. Instead of being in bunk beds with many others around us, we each had a double bed to ourselves. We didn't know how much we needed that refreshment. It was not something we had anticipated or planned, but it was just perfect. The inn had an expansive breakfast spread, which came with the inn. We were able to not only have a hearty meal, but to put goodies in our pack for later in the day. In our hearts, we crooned, hallelujah. 2 nights, we stayed up late enough to have the pilgrim meal. At many of these places that we stayed, somewhere in the town, there would be a thing called the pilgrim's meal. It was many courses. I'll go on to tell you about that. The tables were surrounded by people speaking many languages. One person might translate the conversation so we might understand. One of the nights, a woman spoke that we did that. She spoke both French, Spanish, and English. And so she kept going to the different people and kind of telling us what they were trying to say. I tell myself it's because they are geographically so close to one another. But unlike Nancy, I don't have an ear for languages. There were many courses with a huge variety of tastes. We were encouraged to try everything. I love fish, but I've never seen the head of a fish served on the plate. Wine flowed freely, and desserts were sumptuous. The last refugio we stayed at was Albuquerque de Lazaro. One usually could only stay one night everywhere we went. It's because of how many people were traveling. It was lovely. It was in walking distance of the cathedral. More importantly, it was a bus ride away from a place called the End of the Earth. It's absolutely beautiful, and we really wanted to see it. Somehow, we ended up staying 3 nights. I was trying to remember how we managed to bypass the rule, and I've got to ask Nancy, because I don't know whether somebody else came that day, was supposed to come, and so they put us down with that person's name so that we could get an extra day. But it ended up that we were 3 days there, and it was a lovely place. There were long places that you hung your clothes in, and there were bunk beds. There probably were 20 or 30 in a room, but they had beautiful places where there were couches and chairs that you could sit around in. It just was lovely. What I remember was that it was a real grace. It enabled us to have more than one day at the cathedral. It actually gave us, we went back and forth for a couple of days, and Nancy went off and did her thing, and I went off and did my thing. Like I wanted to send postcards to the people at home. They were having a festival in the square with knights on horseback dressed in medieval garb. It was all so meaningful. And there were also, off of the square was the place where you got your, you showed them, you had to, every place that you stayed, you had to have it stamped so that they would know that you had stopped, you know what I mean, that you had actually gone to these places. And so you would get in these long lines for them to give you the certificate that There were huge lines with people who wanted to put their arms around the statue of St. James when they got into the cathedral. And it was above the altar, and you had to walk steps to go behind it. Catholics believe that if you completed the Camino, you would go to heaven when you died. And if you hugged St. James, you would also get to go to heaven. My beliefs are always evolving, but they're a lot more cosmic. I had a therapist tell me once I had a great sense of humor. It surprised me because I thought of myself, unfortunately, as quite serious. I learned on the Camino that it was extremely important to laugh. We laughed when things didn't go as we planned, or we had no idea where we were. We laughed mostly at ourselves, but when a cow just would not get out of the way, it was something that was just too foreign for us, and we laughed and laughed. Now at home, my dog makes me laugh. He has such a mind of his own, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning, when he decides that it's really time for him to take a walk outside. And sometimes I'll take him out and he'll just walk around. And I want to, but I'm so fearful that he might have an accident. So I just laugh and say, "You are giving me a hard time." He strengthens me. My final thing is, I hope all of you will have an opportunity to walk the Camino. I am certain it will enrich you in ways you can't imagine. I cherish every moment I walk, no matter how challenging it was. However, every one of us here is on our journey through life. I hope you will all experience delight as well as challenge. Most of all, I wish you buen camino, good journey,